The rain was relentless that evening, an unceasing drumbeat against the cracked windows of Amy Clark's tiny apartment. She sat at her wobbly kitchen table, surrounded by unopened bills, a reminder of every misstep she had made. The flickering light above cast shadows that seemed to taunt her, whispering of failure. Her phone buzzed, snapping her from her thoughts. No one ever called her anymore, so when she saw a notification for an incoming message, her curiosity piqued. The sender was unknown. The message contained a single line of text. Your destiny awaits. New Year's Eve. Midnight. The QR code will show the way. Amy frowned and tapped the attachment. A QR code appeared on the screen, its black and white pattern shimmering unnaturally in the dim light. She hesitated. It had to be a prank, or worse, some phishing scam. But as she stared, an inexplicable compulsion took hold. Moments later, her phone chirped again. This time, it was the mailbox notification from her building security system. A package had been delivered. Confused, she grabbed her keys and trudged down to the lobby. There, amidst a pile of junk mail and poorly wrapped parcels, sat a sleek black envelope. Her name was written in elegant gold cursive on its front. She glanced around but found no sign of a courier or delivery truck. The paper felt heavy in her hands, as though it contained more than its slight weight suggested. Inside was a single card, made of smooth, thick stock, embossed with intricate golden filigree. Midnight. A new beginning awaits. The words seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. She flipped the card over. The same QR code from the text was imprinted there. Beneath it were instructions. Scan this at 11:45 p.m. to reveal your destination. Amy shivered, clutching the envelope tighter. She couldn't shake the eerie sensation creeping up her spine. Yet, amidst the unease, a flicker of something else stirred in her chest. Hope. Her life had become a spiral of monotony and failure. Relationships? Ruined. Dreams? Dashed. And now, with a dead-end job and mounting debts, she felt like she was sinking into quicksand. This invitation, bizarre as it was, whispered promises of escape. Still, questions buzzed in her mind. Who sent it? Why her? And what did a new beginning even mean? Rationality urged her to ignore it, but curiosity and desperation clung to her like shadows. She glanced at the clock. 8:45 p.m. 3 hours to decide. Amy held the envelope close as she climbed back to her apartment, its black and gold surface gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights of the stairwell. Once inside, she lit a cigarette, a habit she'd sworn she'd quit. The first drag was acrid and harsh, but it steadied her trembling hands. Her gaze flitted to the stack of unopened bills, then to the dusty vision board she'd once filled with ambitious dreams. A house, a loving partner, a career in art. The goals felt like artifacts from another life. She stubbed out the cigarette and reached for her phone. Against every rational impulse, Amy scanned the QR code. Her phone screen came alive, showing a pulsating golden dot on a map. It marked a location not far from downtown, an abandoned office building she vaguely remembered passing on the bus. Amy leaned back, exhaling shakily. The idea was madness, but so was the thought of continuing her life as it was. She grabbed her coat. The countdown to midnight had begun. Amy arrived at the location 15 minutes before midnight. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets damp and glistening under dim orange streetlights. The building before her was decrepit, a relic from another era. Its facade was a mosaic of broken windows, crumbling stone, and graffiti. But the golden shimmer of the QR code on her phone glowed brighter as she approached, a beacon leading her toward the ornate double doors. To her surprise, the doors swung open with a soft creak, as though expecting her. Beyond them lay a grand hallway lit by flickering chandeliers. The air was warm, carrying the scent of roses and something faintly metallic. Amy hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, but the pull was too strong. She stepped inside, the sound of her boots echoing against the polished marble floor. As the doors closed behind her with a soft thud, the hallway seemed to stretch unnaturally, the walls shimmering like oil on water. She pressed forward, her breath shallow, until she reached another set of doors, massive and gilded, engraved with swirling patterns that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them. Pushing them open revealed a scene straight out of a dream or a nightmare. A vast ballroom stretched before her, impossibly large for the building's size. It was bathed in golden light, with cascading crystal chandeliers illuminating the crowd of elegantly dressed guests. Amy's reflection caught her eye in a towering mirror on the far wall. Her rain-soaked coat and worn boots made her look out of place among the tuxedos and glittering gowns. The floor beneath her feet was a swirling mosaic of black and gold, and as she stepped forward, the pattern seemed to shift, creating an optical illusion of movement. The air buzzed with murmurs, clinking glasses, and soft classical music played by a string quartet in the corner. Amy's unease grew as she took in the faces of the other guests. They were all strikingly beautiful, yet something about them felt wrong. Their smiles were too wide, their movements too graceful, their eyes too sharp. "Welcome." The voice came from nowhere and everywhere at once. The music stopped abruptly, and all heads turned toward a grand staircase at the far end of the room. Descending the steps was a figure who commanded immediate attention. The host. They were tall, their features unerringly perfect, sharp cheekbones, piercing eyes that seemed to change color, and a smile that hinted at both charm and menace. They were dressed in a sleek black suit with golden accents, every step exuding elegance and authority. "Welcome, my dear guests," the host said, their voice smooth and resonant. "Tonight, we celebrate possibility, destiny, the turning of the year, and the granting of wishes." Applause erupted, though Amy noticed a few hesitant claps among the guests. The host's gaze swept over the crowd, lingering on Amy for a moment longer than she liked. Her stomach twisted, but she couldn't look away. "As you may have guessed," the host continued, descending the final steps, "this is no ordinary celebration. Each of you has been invited because you seek something, a wish, a change, a miracle. And tonight, you may have it." But they paused, their smile widening. Everything in life comes at a price. The room buzzed with whispers, and Amy could feel the tension rising. The host gestured grandly, and waitstaff emerged from the shadows, carrying trays of champagne glasses. "Drink, mingle, enjoy the festivities. At midnight, the bargain begins." Amy accepted a glass of champagne from a waiter, her fingers trembling as they brushed the cold crystal. She looked around, hoping to find an ally or someone who seemed as out of place as she felt. Near the edge of the room, she spotted a young man standing stiffly, his eyes darting nervously. He looked to be about her age, dressed in an ill-fitting suit. Gathering her courage, Amy approached him. "First time here?" she asked, attempting a smile. He nodded, his face pale. "Yeah, I got an invitation." It felt too strange to ignore. "Same here." Amy hesitated, then added, "I'm Amy." "Matt," he replied, shaking her hand. Their small moment of connection was interrupted by the sound of a clock chiming. Midnight. The host's voice rang out, silencing the room. "It is time. Let the midnight bargain begin." The chandeliers dimmed, casting the ballroom in eerie shadows. The floor began to glow, the swirling patterns coalescing into a single golden sigil. The walls seemed to close in, the mirrors reflecting impossible angles. The host extended their arms, their smile growing impossibly wide. "Who will make the first wish?" Amy clutched her champagne glass, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. The room fell deathly silent, the air growing heavier with each passing second. Amy's pulse pounded in her ears as she scanned the faces around her. The other guests stood frozen, their eyes flitting nervously between the host and the glowing sigil on the ballroom floor. Finally, a man stepped forward, his movements deliberate but tense. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, with streaks of gray in his slicked-back hair and a sharp, tailored suit. "I'll go first," he said, his voice steady despite the clear tension in his clenched jaw. The host turned to him, their eyes gleaming with approval. "Ah, Mr. Donovan, a man of ambition. Please, step into the circle." The sigil pulsed faintly as Mr. Donovan approached, casting flickering golden light across his face. He hesitated at the edge of the circle, the swirling patterns within it hypnotic, almost alive. Then, with a deep breath, he stepped inside. The change was immediate. The light flared, enveloping him in an aura of shimmering gold. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the air around him seemed to distort, rippling like heat waves. "What is it you desire, Mr. Donovan?" the host asked, their voice softer now, almost tender. Donovan's voice faltered for a moment before he regained his composure. "I want success, power, influence that cannot be challenged." The host tilted their head, their smile widening. "A bold wish, a common wish, and yet no less worthy. So be it." The sigil beneath Donovan's feet flared brighter, and he cried out, his body stiffening as if struck by lightning. Amy clutched her champagne glass tightly, her fingers digging into the cool surface. As quickly as it had begun, the light faded, and Donovan stumbled forward, gasping for breath. His face was flushed, his pupils dilated, but there was a manic energy about him now, a fire in his eyes. "Congratulations," the host said, stepping forward to help steady him. "Your wish has been granted. Success and power are now yours to command." Donovan staggered back toward the crowd, and Amy noticed how others instinctively recoiled, as though sensing something unnatural about him. "Well, what's the price?" Donovan stammered, his voice breaking. The host's smile didn't falter. "But the price? That remains to be seen, Mr. Donovan. All will be revealed at dawn." Murmurs rippled through the room, and Donovan looked as though he might argue, but a sudden flash of gold across his eyes silenced him. He nodded stiffly and retreated to the far side of the room, avoiding everyone's gaze. Amy turned to Matt, who was gripping the back of a chair, so tightly his knuckles were white. "This is insane," she whispered. Matt nodded, swallowing hard. "It's like they're playing with us." Before Amy could respond, the host clapped their hands. "Who will be next?" This time, the hesitation was longer. Guests shuffled nervously, whispering among themselves. "Do you think we can lead?" Matt asked in a low voice, his eyes darting toward the massive double doors. Amy glanced at them. Though they remained ajar, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were anything but inviting. The shadows beyond seemed thicker, darker, almost alive. "Maybe," she said, though the word felt hollow even as she spoke it. Another guest, a young woman in an emerald green gown, stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the mosaic floor. Her face was pale but determined. "I'll go," she said, her voice trembling only slightly. The host greeted her with the same predatory smile. "And what is it you desire, Miss Langley?" The woman hesitated, glancing around the room before speaking. I want my brother back. He died last year. I want him alive again." The crowd erupted into murmurs, but the host raised a hand for silence. A wish of the heart," they mused, their tone almost reverent. "A rare request in this age of greed. Step into the circle, Miss Langley." Amy's stomach churned as the sigil flared once more, casting the ballroom in its eerie light. Miss Langley stepped forward, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. The light engulfed her, brighter and more intense than before. The air around her crackled, and she screamed, a piercing sound that made Amy wince. When the light faded, Miss Langley collapsed to her knees, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. The host stepped forward, crouching to meet her gaze. "Your wish has been granted," they said softly. "Your brother lives again." Miss Langley sobbed, her tears glistening in the golden light. "Thank you," she whispered. But the host's smile remained sharp, their voice laced with something darker. "Dawn will reveal the price, my dear." Amy felt the walls of the ballroom close in around her. The shimmering chandeliers, the swirling patterns, the host's unsettling smile. All of it felt suffocating. She turned to Matt, her voice a strained whisper. "We have to get out of here." Matt nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "Before it's our turn." Amy's heart raced as she and Matt exchanged a knowing look. The ballroom, once grand and intoxicating in its allure, now felt like a gilded cage. The shimmering chandeliers overhead seemed dimmer, casting distorted shadows across the room. The walls, lined with their ornate mirrors and shifting paintings, seemed to press closer, a silent warning. "We need to leave," Matt whispered urgently, his voice trembling. Amy nodded, clutching her champagne glass so tightly that her knuckles whitened. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on the double doors they had entered through. To her horror, they were no longer ajar. They stood shut, their golden filigree glowing faintly. "They weren't closed before," she muttered, panic creeping into her voice. Matt followed her gaze and cursed under his breath. "I don't like this." The host's voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd, silencing the room. "It seems our next guest is hesitant," they said, their tone light, but laced with menace. Their eyes gleamed, scanning the crowd like a predator searching for its next meal. Amy avoided their gaze, grabbing Matt's arm and pulling him toward the doors. As they wove through the crowd, she noticed other guests whispering to one another, their faces pale with unease. No one tried to stop them, but their expressions carried a mix of pity and resignation, as though they already knew escape was futile. When they reached the doors, Amy pressed her hand against the cold, golden surface, her breath catching in her throat. "Help me push," she urged Matt. Together, they shoved against the massive doors. They didn't budge. The ornate handles refused to turn, and the filigree burned hot under their touch, forcing them to pull their hands away. "Locked," Matt hissed, stepping back. His voice rose in panic. "What the hell is this place?" Amy didn't answer, her mind racing. The host's earlier words echoed in her ears. "At midnight, the bargain begins." It was no coincidence the doors were now sealed. Whatever game they were playing, it had started in earnest. "Amy," Matt's voice pulled her back to reality. He had turned to face the ballroom, his expression one of horror. She followed his gaze and felt her stomach drop. The host was staring directly at them, their smile sharp and cold. The golden glow from the sigil on the floor seemed to intensify, reflecting in their eyes like fire. "Are you leaving so soon?" the host asked, their voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "The night is still young, and the opportunities are endless." The crowd parted slightly, making way for the host as they began to approach. Amy and Matt instinctively backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The closed doors loomed behind them, and the host was closing in. "Perhaps you misunderstand," the host continued, their tone dripping with condescension. "This is not a mere party you can walk away from. You were chosen for a reason, and you have yet to fulfill your role." Matt stepped forward, his hands trembling but clenched into fists. "We didn't agree to any of this. You can't keep us here?" The host stopped, tilting their head in mock curiosity. "Can I?" They extended a hand, and the sigil on the floor flared brighter. The air in the room grew thick, pressing down on Amy's chest. Matt stumbled, clutching his throat. I can't breathe," he choked out. "Enough," Amy shouted, stepping in front of Matt. "We'll stay. Just stop this." The host lowered their hand, and the oppressive force in the room lifted. Matt doubled over, gasping for air. "Wise choice," the host said, their smile returning. "But understand this. There is no escape from destiny. You are here because you belong here." Amy helped Matt stand, her hands shaking. The host leaned in closer, their voice dropping to a whisper only the two of them could hear. "You could try to run. Many have, but the house always wins." They straightened, turning back to the crowd. "Now, who's next?" Amy pulled Matt away from the doors, her mind racing. "We can't fight them head-on," she murmured. "There has to be another way out." Matt nodded weakly, his face pale. "We have to find it fast." As they moved deeper into the crowd, Amy noticed the mirrors lining the walls. Their surfaces seemed to ripple, showing faint images of corridors and staircases that didn't exist in the ballroom. Her pulse quickened. "Matt, look," she whispered, gesturing toward one of the mirrors. He followed her gaze, his brow furrowing. "What is that?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But it might be our way out." The host's voice rang out again, drawing their attention. Another guest had stepped forward, this one an older woman clutching a handkerchief. Her voice trembled as she made her wish, but Amy was no longer listening. Her focus was on the mirrors and the fleeting images they held. They had to try. She grabbed Matt's hand, her voice firm. We're going to the mirrors. Amy tugged Matt through the crowd, weaving between clusters of nervous guests. The host's voice echoed behind them as another wish was granted, followed by gasps of awe and murmurs of unease. But Amy couldn't afford to look back. Her eyes were locked on the nearest mirror, its surface shimmering as though liquid, revealing glimpses of a hallway that didn't exist in the physical space of the ballroom. When they reached the mirror, Matt hesitated. "What if it's a trap?" he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Amy tightened her grip on his hand. "What choice do we have? The doors are locked, and I don't trust the host. This might be our only way out." The mirror's surface rippled as if responding to her voice, the hallway beyond becoming clearer. It was narrow and dimly lit, lined with heavy wooden doors that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. "I'm going," Amy said, steeling herself. She reached out, her fingertips brushing the mirror's surface. It was cold but pliant, like touching the surface of a still pond. With a deep breath, she pushed forward. The mirror gave way, and she stumbled through, pulling Matt along with her. The transition was disorienting. For a moment, everything was weightless, silent, and cold. Then the air changed, thicker, heavier, and laced with the faint scent of damp wood. They found themselves standing in the hallway they had seen in the mirror. The floor creaked under their weight, and the flickering sconces on the walls cast dancing shadows. Amy turned back to see the mirror they had stepped through now solid, reflecting only their own pale faces. "We're in," Matt whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of their footsteps. Amy glanced down the hallway. The doors on either side loomed like sentinels, each adorned with intricate carvings that seemed to writhe and twist in the flickering light. Faint whispers echoed from behind some of them, while others emitted a low, rhythmic thudding, as if something was trying to get out. "Let's keep moving," Amy said, her voice trembling. They walked cautiously, their footsteps muffled by a threadbare carpet that ran the length of the hallway. Every so often, Amy glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see the host or one of the other guests following them. But the hallway remained eerily empty. "What do you think's behind these doors?" Matt asked, eyeing one that seemed to be oozing a dark, viscous liquid. "Nothing we want to see," Amy replied. A sudden laugh echoed from one of the doors, a high-pitched, childlike giggle that sent chills down Amy's spine. Matt flinched, quickening his pace. At the end of the hallway, they reached a door that was different from the others. It was plain, uncarved, and slightly ajar. Warm golden light spilled through the crack, a stark contrast to the cold gloom of the hallway. Amy exchanged a glance with Matt. "This could be it," she said. Matt nodded, his expression grim. "Or another trap." Amy pushed the door open cautiously, revealing a small, cozy study. A fireplace crackled in one corner, its flames casting flickering shadows on the dark wood-paneled walls. A large desk sat in the center of the room, covered in scattered papers and an ornate inkstand. On the far wall, another mirror loomed, its surface dark and still. Amy stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. "It's empty," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. Matt followed her, closing the door behind them. "What is this place?" Amy approached the desk, her fingers brushing the papers. They were covered in flowing script, the ink shimmering like molten gold. The words seemed to shift as she tried to read them, evading her understanding. "It's like some kind of office," she said, picking up a paper. Matt examined the mirror on the far wall. "Do you think this leads back to the ballroom?" Amy shook her head. "I don't think so. Look at the edges, there's something different about it." The mirror's frame was carved with jagged, thorn-like patterns, and the surface seemed to pulse faintly, as though it were alive. Suddenly, the door behind them rattled violently. Amy and Matt spun around as the handle twisted, the wood creaking under an unseen force. "Do you think it's them?" Matt whispered, his voice barely audible. Amy didn't answer. She grabbed a heavy paperweight from the desk, clutching it like a weapon. The rattling stopped, replaced by a slow, deliberate knock. Knock! 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 Amy's breath hitched. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. For a moment, there was silence. Then a familiar voice answered, muffled by the thick wood. "It's me. Open the door." Amy's blood ran cold. It was the host. Amy gripped the paperweight tighter, her palms slick with sweat. The host's voice seeped through the door, smooth and unhurried, like a predator toying with its prey. "No need to be afraid," the voice cooed. "I only want to help you. This place is dangerous, especially for those who wander where they shouldn't." Matt backed away from the door, his face pale. "They know we're here. What do we do?" "Stay quiet," Amy hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. The knocking resumed, slower this time, each impact sending vibrations through the room. "Amy," the host's voice purred. "You've come so far. Don't you want to know why you were chosen? Don't you want to hear the truth?" Amy's heart hammered in her chest. How did they know her name? She glanced at Matt, who was staring at the door like it might burst open at any second. "We're not opening it," Amy whispered. The host chuckled, the sound low and unnerving. "You think you can defy the rules? That you can simply walk away?" The voice grew sharper, more menacing. "You don't understand what you've become a part of." The door handle twisted violently, and the wood groaned under the pressure. "We need to get out of here," Matt hissed, his voice trembling. Amy's eyes darted to the mirror on the far wall. Its surface was no longer still. Faint ripples disturbed the glass, and shapes moved within it. Corridors, doors, shifting shadows. "This mirror," she said, pointing. "It's another portal." Matt hesitated, glancing between the mirror and the door. "And if it's worse on the other side?" Amy didn't answer. The door shuddered again, the knocking now a steady, relentless rhythm. "Knock! Knock! Knock!" Amy gritted her teeth and crossed the room, dragging Matt with her. "We don't have a choice." The mirror's surface was cold and slick, resisting her touch at first. But as she pressed harder, the glass gave way, rippling outward like water. "Let's go," she urged, pulling Matt toward it. The knocking stopped abruptly. Amy froze, her fingers still on the mirror. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the crackle of the fireplace. Then came the voice, low and guttural, like a growl. "You can't run from me." The door burst open, slamming against the wall. A wave of frigid air swept through the room, extinguishing the fire and plunging them into darkness. Amy didn't wait to see what came through the door. She grabbed Matt's arm and shoved him toward the mirror. "Go!" He stumbled forward, disappearing into the rippling surface. Amy followed, the cold glass swallowing her whole, just as something heavy crashed into the desk behind her. The transition was harsher this time. Amy tumbled forward, the air knocked from her lungs as she hit a hard, uneven surface. She gasped, the metallic taste of blood filling her mouth. "Amy!" Matt's voice called. She blinked, trying to orient herself. They were no longer in the study, but a dimly lit corridor. The walls were rough stone, damp and cold to the touch, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed around them. Matt knelt beside her, his face pale and drawn. "Are you okay?" She nodded weakly, struggling to her feet. "Where are we?" "I don't know," Matt said, his voice shaky. "But it's not the ballroom. That's something." Amy glanced around, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. The corridor stretched endlessly in both directions, lit by faintly glowing sconces. The air was heavy with moisture and a faint, acrid smell that made her stomach churn. "What was that thing?" Matt asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Amy shook her head. "The host, or something worse." The memory of the voice, low and predatory, sent a shiver down her spine. Whatever it wasn't human. A low rumble echoed through the corridor, and Amy instinctively pressed herself against the wall. Matt did the same, his breathing quick and shallow. From the darkness ahead, a shadow shifted. It was massive, its shape indistinct, and its movements unnatural, as though it glided rather than walked. "What the hell is that?" Matt whispered. Amy grabbed his hand, pulling him in the opposite direction. "We're not waiting to find out." They ran, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the oppressive silence. The corridor twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the unknown. The glowing sconces flickered as they passed, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to reach for them. Finally, they stumbled into a larger chamber, its walls lined with dozens of mirrors. Each one reflected a different scene. The ballroom, the study, the hallway they had just left, and others. Places Amy didn't recognize, but that filled her with dread. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and atop it was a black envelope identical to the one Amy had received. Matt stepped forward cautiously. Another invitation? Amy's stomach turned as she stared at the envelope. Its golden lettering gleamed faintly in the flickering light, and she had the unnerving sense that it was waiting for her. Amy stared at the black envelope on the pedestal. Its sleek surface shimmered faintly, as though alive, and the golden lettering on its face seemed to shift under the flickering light. Her pulse quickened. "Don't touch it," Matt said, his voice a strained whisper. Amy didn't respond immediately. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the envelope. It felt like it was watching her, drawing her in with an unspoken promise. Matt grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "Amy, listen to me. This is how they get to us. Whatever's in that envelope, it's a trap." She blinked, the spell broken, and stepped away from the pedestal. "You're right," she murmured, though the pull of the envelope lingered in her mind. They turned their attention to the mirrors lining the chamber. Each surface shimmered faintly, displaying a unique and unsettling scene. One mirror showed the ballroom, now dark and empty, with a sigil on the floor glowing faintly. Another showed the study they had just escaped, the doors swinging open and shut as if caught in an invisible wind. But others revealed things that made Amy's stomach twist. One showed a dark forest, its twisted trees writhing as if alive. Another displayed a crumbling stone bridge over a chasm that seemed to stretch endlessly into shadow. "These mirrors," Matt said, his voice trembling. "They're doors, aren't they?" Amy nodded, her throat dry. "Probably. But where do they lead?" "Somewhere worse," Matt muttered. Before they could decide what to do, the chamber shuddered. A deep, guttural growl reverberated through the air, making the mirrors tremble in their frames. "They're coming," Amy whispered, her voice tight with panic. Matt pointed to a mirror near the far wall. Its surface showed a hallway lit by warm, golden light, not unlike the corridor they had first entered after leaving the ballroom. "That one," he said. "It looks safe." Amy hesitated. None of this felt safe, but staying here wasn't an option. She nodded, and together they approached the mirror. The glass rippled under her touch, cold and yielding, just like the others. Taking a deep breath, Amy stepped through, pulling Matt behind her. The golden light enveloped them, and for a moment, Amy felt a strange sense of calm. But as they emerged on the other side, that feeling vanished. They were back in the ballroom, only it wasn't the same. The chandeliers hung lower, their crystals warped and twisted. The mirrors on the walls showed distorted reflections, their surfaces rippling as though alive. The sigil on the floor was brighter now, its golden light casting eerie shadows that danced unnaturally. And they weren't alone. A group of guests stood in the center of the room, their faces pale and blank, their eyes empty. Amy recognized some of them. Mr. Donovan, the woman who had wished for her brother. But they looked wrong. Their movements were jerky, their heads tilting at unnatural angles. "They're like puppets," Matt whispered, his voice shaking. Amy grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the edge of the room. "Stay low," she murmured. "We need to get out of here before they see us." They crept along the wall, avoiding the gaze of the puppet guests. As they neared the double doors, a familiar voice stopped them in their tracks. "Leaving so soon?" The host stepped into view, their smile sharper than ever. They were standing at the foot of the grand staircase, their eyes gleaming with triumph. "You've been busy," the host said, their tone light but menacing. "Exploring places you were never meant to go. Naughty, naughty." The guests turned in unison, their heads snapping toward Amy and Matt. "Run," Amy hissed, shoving Matt toward the doors. They sprinted, but the floor beneath them shifted, the swirling patterns moving like quicksand. Amy stumbled, catching herself on the edge of a table as Matt clawed at the door handles. "They're locked," he shouted. The host's laughter filled the room, echoing unnaturally. "There's no escape, my dears. You made your choice the moment you entered." Amy turned to face them, her chest heaving. What do you want from us? The host tilted their head, their smile growing impossibly wide. You were brought here because you sought something, a wish, a change, an escape. But you didn't stop to ask the most important question. Amy's voice trembled. What question? The host stepped closer, their presence oppressive. What price are you willing to pay? The sigil on the floor flared, and the air grew thick with heat. The puppet guests began to move, their jerky steps closing the distance between them and Amy. Make a wish, the host said, their voice a hypnotic command, or face the consequences of refusing. Matt grabbed Amy's hand, his voice panicked. We can't. You know it's a trap. Amy's mind raced. The walls were closing in, the host's gaze searing into her soul. The room seemed to spin, the distorted mirrors showing flashes of her past, her failures, her regrets, her darkest fears. And through it all, the host whispered, make your choice. Amy's chest tightened as the host's words wrapped around her like a noose. The air in the ballroom grew heavier, charged with an almost electric tension. The puppet guests crept closer, their blank eyes fixed on her and Matt. Make a wish, the host urged again, their voice smooth and coaxing. Don't you want it all to change, Amy? The pain, the failure, the hopelessness, gone just like that. All you have to do is ask. Amy clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She could feel Matt trembling beside her, his breathing shallow and frantic. Don't listen to them, he muttered, though his voice shook with doubt. But Amy's mind betrayed her, dredging up memories she had buried deep. The nights spent crying over bills she couldn't pay, the empty spaces where her dreams used to live, the suffocating loneliness that gnawed at her soul. What would you wish for? The host pressed, their tone almost tender. Freedom? Wealth? Love? I can give it to you. No one will know the price but you. The sigil beneath their feet pulsed again, and Amy's vision swam. The ballroom dissolved into a shifting tapestry of images. A cozy home, free of debt and worry. A career as a celebrated artist, her paintings adored by millions. The warmth of a partner's embrace, steady and unwavering. Tears welled in her eyes. It was everything she had ever wanted, laid out before her like a banquet. Stop it, Matt shouted, pulling her back. It's not real, Amy. Don't let them in your head. The images shattered, and the ballroom reassembled around her. Amy gasped, clutching her chest as if the visions had stolen the air from her lungs. The host's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. Your friend is quite persistent, they said, their gaze shifting to Matt. But you, Matthew, have desires too, don't you? Matt froze, his face pale. The host stepped closer, their voice soft and inviting. I see you, Matthew. The guilt that weighs on you. The fear of being nothing, of fading into irrelevance. You don't have to carry it anymore. I can take it all away. Matt shook his head violently. Shut up. You don't know me, don't I? The host tilted their head, their expression almost pitying. What's one small price to pay for peace? For purpose? Matt's hands trembled as he backed away, but Amy grabbed his arm, grounding him. Don't listen, she whispered. We can get through this. The host sighed, their expression shifting to one of boredom. You're both so stubborn, but no matter. The time for games is over. The sigil on the floor flared blindingly bright, and the puppet guests surged forward. Amy and Matt scrambled back, but there was nowhere to run. The walls loomed closer, the mirrors rippling as though eager to swallow them whole. Amy's mind raced. They were trapped, out of options. Unless her gaze darted to the mirror they had emerged from earlier. It still shimmered faintly, though the image within had changed. Instead of the ballroom, it now displayed the pedestal chamber, with the black envelope waiting in its center. Matt, she hissed, pointing. The mirror. He followed her gaze, his eyes widening in understanding. Together, they made a break for it, weaving through the encroaching crowd. Amy's heart pounded as she dodged grasping hands and jerking movements. The host's voice rang out, cold and sharp. You can't escape. The bargain has already begun. Amy ignored them, diving headfirst into the mirror. The glass rippled around her, and for a moment, she was weightless again, suspended in a cold void. When she tumbled out the other side, the pedestal chamber greeted her with its oppressive silence. Matt landed beside her, groaning as he hit the floor. "Are we safe?" he asked, his voice ragged. Amy shook her head. "I don't think we're safe anywhere in this place." Her eyes locked on the pedestal. The black envelope sat there, untouched, its golden lettering gleaming faintly in the dim light. Matt staggered to his feet, glaring at it. "Why is that thing always here?" Amy hesitated, the weight of the host's words pressing down on her. The envelope pulsed faintly, as if it could sense her gaze. "It's part of the ritual," she murmured. "The invitations, the wishes, the price, it's all connected. If we could figure out who or what sent these." Matt shook his head. "We need to destroy it. Whatever this thing is, it's keeping us tied to this nightmare." Amy reached out, but her fingers stopped inches from the envelope. Her mind buzzed with possibilities. If this truly was the source of the host's power, perhaps they could turn it against them. Or perhaps it was another trap. "We need to make a decision," Matt said, his voice tense. The chamber shuddered, and faint laughter echoed from the mirrors surrounding them. "We're running out of time," Amy whispered. Amy stared at the black envelope, her hand trembling inches above it. It pulsed faintly, the golden lettering shimmering in the dim light. The chamber seemed to press in around her, the whispers from the mirrors growing louder. "Destroy it," Matt urged, his voice sharp and desperate. "If we break it, maybe this all ends." Amy hesitated. The envelope exuded a strange pull, like it was alive, calling to her. She could feel the weight of it, not in her hand, but in her mind, a promise, a threat, a temptation. "What if this is the key?" she whispered, her voice unsteady. Matt groaned in frustration. "The key to what? Another trap?" "Amy, we don't have time for this." The chamber shuddered violently, and the mirrors surrounding them rippled like disturbed water. Amy could see fleeting images in their surfaces. The ballroom, the sigil, the host's predatory smile. A voice, smooth and sinister, echoed through the room. "You think you can outwit me?" Amy flinched as the host's face appeared in one of the mirrors, their sharp features distorted by the glass. "The bargain cannot be undone," the host said, their tone calm but menacing. "You are here because you were meant to be. Accept it." Amy's mind raced. She couldn't shake the feeling that the envelope held the answers, or at least the next step. Steeling herself, she grabbed it. The moment her fingers touched the envelope, the room froze. The whispers stopped, the mirrors stilled, and a deafening silence enveloped them. "Amy!" Matt shouted, reaching for her, but it was too late. The envelope disintegrated in her hands, its black and gold fragments dissolving into the air. The sigil from the ballroom appeared beneath her feet, glowing with an intense golden light. Matt cried, but the force of the light knocked him back, slamming him against the far wall. Amy tried to move, but she was rooted in place. The sigil flared, and the host's voice filled the room, triumphant and cruel. "You've chosen wisely, my dear," they said, their figure materializing before her. The host's form was more imposing than ever, their features shifting and blurring, as if they were made of shadows and light. Their eyes, twin pools of molten gold, bore into her. "What's happening?" Amy demanded, her voice trembling. "The truth," the host replied, stepping closer. "You've taken the next step, Amy. You've accepted the bargain, though you may not yet understand the terms." Amy gritted her teeth. "I didn't agree to anything." The host chuckled. "But you did. The moment you entered this place, you sealed your fate. All who come here are bound by the same rules. Wishes granted, prices paid, cycles continued." Matt staggered to his feet, his face pale. "What does that mean? What do you want from us?" The host turned to him, their smile sharp. "What I want is irrelevant. What matters is what you've already given." Amy's stomach churned. "What are you talking about?" The host extended a hand, and the mirrors around the room lit up, each one displaying a different scene. Amy saw herself, arguing with her boss, throwing out rejection letters, crying over bills. She saw Matt alone in his apartment, pacing and drinking as the phone rang unanswered. Your lives were already mine before you arrived, the host said. Every failure, every regret, every desperate wish brought you here. You don't belong in the world you left behind. You belong here, where your desires can finally mean something. Amy shook her head, her voice breaking. That's not true. I didn't wish for this. The host's smile faltered, their gaze hardening. Then leave if you can. The mirrors shimmered, their surfaces showing doorways leading into darkness. Matt grabbed Amy's arm. Come on, let's go. But Amy couldn't move. The sigil's light bound her in place, its heat searing into her skin. The host leaned closer, their voice a low whisper. If you leave, the price will still be paid. But perhaps not by you. Amy's eyes widened. What does that mean? The host straightened, their smile returning. Your wishes are tied to others. A ripple in one life creates a wave in another. Deny the bargain, and the consequences fall elsewhere. On those you love, on those who trust you. Amy's breath caught in her throat. You're lying. Am I? The host said, their tone almost mocking. Are you willing to take that chance? Matt pulled her harder. We have a try, Amy? Whatever they're saying, it's just another trick. Amy looked at him, then back at the host. The weight of the decision bore down on her, heavier than anything she had ever known. I don't know what to do, she whispered. The host stepped back, gesturing to the mirrors. The choice is yours. Stay and accept the bargain, or leave and gamble with the lives of those you hold dear. Amy's heart raced as the sigil pulsed beneath her, the golden light illuminating the fear in Matt's eyes. The choice was hers. The chamber fell silent, save for the low hum of the sigil beneath Amy's feet. The mirrors surrounding them shimmered, their surfaces revealing fleeting images that clawed at her heart. Her estranged parents, her few close friends, and the echoes of a life she had struggled to hold together. The host stood tall, their shifting form both mesmerizing and terrifying. Their golden eyes gleamed with cruel amusement as they waited for her to speak. Matt's grip on her arm tightened. Amy, we have to leave. This isn't real. It can't be. Amy swallowed hard, her voice a strained whisper. What if it is? What if leaving means... Her words faltered as one of the mirrors flashed to life. It showed her apartment, tiny, cluttered, and cold. Her best friend, Clara, was on the phone, her voice frantic. Amy, please call me back. I'm worried about you. The image flickered, replaced by another. Matt's sister sitting alone in a hospital waiting room, her face drawn and pale. The host chuckled, the sound low and mocking. The threads of fate are fragile things. Pull one, and the entire tapestry unravels. Do you truly believe your choices won't ripple outwards? Amy clenched her fists, her heart pounding. You're manipulating me. That's what this whole thing is about, isn't it? Breaking us down until we give in. The host's smile widened. I'm offering you clarity. The truth you've always sought but feared to face. What you do with it is up to you. Matt stepped forward, his voice rising with anger. Enough of this. You can't keep us here forever. We're leaving. The host tilted their head, their gaze shifting to him. Matthew, always so certain, yet so lost. Do you think running will save you? That the shadows won't follow you back to your hollow little life? Matt faltered, his bravado crumbling. Amy reached for him, her voice trembling. Don't listen to them. They want us to doubt ourselves. The host stepped closer, their presence suffocating. You have a choice, Amy. Stay and accept the bargain, or leave and face the consequences. But know this, once you step through that mirror, there is no coming back. The sigil beneath her feet flared, its heat searing into her skin. Amy's mind raced. The host's words were poison, but the images in the mirrors felt too real to ignore. What happens if I stay? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The host's smile softened, becoming almost gentle. You take your rightful place among us. No more suffering, no more fear. Your desires fulfilled, your purpose clear. But their smile turned sharp again. You must become part of the cycle. You must bring others here. Amy's stomach churned. And if I leave? The host's gaze darkened. Then you gamble. The threads may break. Lives will change. Some will suffer. Perhaps even the ones you care about most. Tears welled in Amy's eyes as she turned to Matt. His expression was one of raw desperation. Don't do it, Amy. We can find another way. Together. She looked back at the mirrors, the images flickering with unbearable clarity. Clara, Matt's sister, the lives they might destroy by leaving. Her voice broke as she whispered, "What if there is no other way?" Matt grabbed her shoulders, shaking her gently. "There has to be. We're not the ones doing this. They are. Don't let them win." The sigil pulsed again, the heat rising. The mirrors began to warp, their images distorting as the host's presence grew stronger. "Choose," they said, their voice ringing with finality. Amy's breath hitched. The weight of the moment crushed her, every path fraught with loss and regret. Her trembling hand reached for Matt's. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "No," Matt started, but his words were drowned out as the sigil flared with blinding light. When the light faded, Amy was alone. The mirrors were gone, replaced by a single towering window that revealed the ballroom below. Guests milled about in their glittering finery, their laughter and music distant and hollow. The host stood beside her, their expression serene. "You've made your choice." Amy felt the weight of the black envelope in her hand. Its golden lettering shimmered, though the words had changed. "Your destiny awaits. Deliver the invitation." Her knees buckled, but the host caught her, their grip firm and cold. "Don't despair," they said softly. "You've gained more than you've lost. You will see in time." Amy's reflection in the window stared back at her, elegantly dressed, poised, yet hollow. Her eyes shimmered with the same molten gold as the host's. What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The host smiled. "Now, the cycle continues." Far below, a new guest entered the ballroom, their eyes wide with wonder and fear. In their hand was a black envelope, identical to the one Amy had once received. Post-credit scene. Somewhere in a dimly lit apartment, a phone buzzed. A young man, his face weary with years of struggle, glanced at the screen. The text was brief, accompanied by a QR code. "Your destiny awaits. Midnight. The QR code will show the way." The man hesitated, then clicked the link. Far away, Amy stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching through the towering window. Her lips curled into a faint smile,